I wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. It was a Tuesday. I had taken a long lunch break to stop by the bank and ask about refinancing options on our home. Routine, the kind of errand you do on autopilot. I remember checking my watch twice while I waited in line, thinking about the meeting I had to get back to by 2. The teller processed my initial request, then paused. She looked at her screen, then back at me, then at her screen again. She excused herself without explanation. I assumed a system issue, maybe a flag on the account for the refinance inquiry. These things happen. She came back 2 minutes later and asked if I could follow her to a private office. Not a cubicle. An office. With a door. The branch manager was already seated inside. She introduced herself, shook my hand, and gestured for me to sit. Her tone was professional. Measured. The kind of careful voice people use when they've had training on how to deliver uncomfortable information. She asked me to confirm my identity. I did. She pulled up the account on her screen, turned it slightly toward me, and began walking me through our joint account activity. I started to tell her I was there about refinancing. She nodded and said we would get to that. But first, she had a question. She asked if I was aware of all the accounts currently linked to my household profile. I said yes. Checking, savings, and the joint account my wife and I had maintained since we got married. She looked at me for a moment. Then she asked, quietly, whether my wife had ever mentioned a second account. The room didn't spin. My heart didn't pound out of my chest. It was quieter than that. It was the specific feeling of a floor you trusted, shifting just slightly beneath your feet. Enough to know something was wrong. I told her no. She nodded slowly, folded her hands, and said, "Then there are some things you should probably see. My wife and I met when we were both 26.
She was working in marketing. I was 2 years into a mid-level finance job that I was quietly trying to grow into something better. We dated for 2 years, got engaged, married in a small outdoor ceremony with about 60 people, nothing extravagant. We both agreed we'd rather spend the money on a house than a single afternoon. That practical thinking was something I loved about her, or something I believed about her. Looking back, I'm not always sure those are the same thing. We bought our first home in year 3 of the marriage, combined our finances fully around that same time. One joint account for household expenses, one shared savings account we contributed to equally every month. She had her income, I had mine. Everything was visible to both of us. That was the agreement. That was the foundation. For 8 years, I had no reason to question it. She managed most of the day-to-day bill payments because her schedule was more flexible. I handled the larger financial decisions, the mortgage reviews, the tax filings, the investment contributions. We each had a role. It worked. At least I thought it worked. We weren't a perfect couple. No one is. We had disagreements about time, about priorities, about the way stress made both of us go quiet instead of talking. But there was never anything that felt like a fracture. Nothing that made me think she was building something separate from what we had. That's the part that stayed with me longest after everything came out. Not the anger, not the betrayal itself. The fact that I had been completely calm for years, inside a life that had a hidden room in it, and I never once felt the door. The branch manager walked me through it methodically. She wasn't unkind about it. She kept her voice neutral and let the screen do most of the talking. I appreciated that more than she probably knew. I didn't need someone managing my emotions in that moment. I needed facts. What she showed me started small.
Over the past 26 months, there had been recurring transfers out of our joint account. Never large enough to trigger an automatic alert. Never round numbers. $43 here, $87 there. $112 on a Thursday in March. The kind of amounts that look like subscriptions, or a forgotten gym membership, or a parking ticket you paid online and didn't think to mention. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they added up to just over $19,000. She let that number sit on the screen long enough for me to read it twice. The transfers all went to the same destination, an account opened approximately 28 months ago. Sole signatory, my wife's name, her social security number, our home address. I had never been added to it. I had never been told about it. I asked the manager if this was legal. She said opening a personal account was not illegal. Transferring money from a joint account without the other party's knowledge existed in a gray area that would depend on how a court interpreted the account agreement we had both signed. She slid a printed summary across the desk. I looked at the transaction dates. I looked at the amounts. I started doing what my brain does under pressure, which is organize. I was already sorting the dates against events I could remember. Holidays, trips, arguments, periods when she had seemed distant or unusually relaxed. The pattern didn't give me answers yet, but it gave me the right questions. I folded the paper, put it in my jacket pocket, and thanked her for her time. Then I went back to work and sat at my desk for 40 minutes without doing a single thing. I made a decision in those 40 minutes at my desk. I was not going to walk through the front door and explode. Not because I wasn't angry. I was. But anger without information is just noise. And I needed signal, not noise. I needed to understand the full shape of what I was looking at before I said a single word.
So I went home at the normal time. I stopped at the grocery store we always used and picked up the things she had texted me that morning to grab. Olive oil, Greek yogurt, the specific brand of sparkling water she liked. I stood in that aisle and stared at 3 nearly identical green bottles and picked the right one, because that's what a normal Tuesday looked like. She was in the kitchen when I got home, music on low, something on the stove. She smiled when I came in, asked how my day was, took the grocery bag from me and started putting things away. I watched her hands. I said my day was fine, busy, the usual. She told me about a frustrating call she'd had with a vendor. She laughed at one point. She poured herself a glass of wine and offered me one. I said yes. We ate dinner together. She talked. I listened. I asked follow-up questions in the right places. I laughed once when it was appropriate. I loaded the dishwasher while she wiped down the counter, the same way we had divided that task for years. She had no idea. That was the thing that unsettled me more than anything else that night. Not the secret account, not the $19,000. It was how easy it was for her to sit across from me and be completely normal. No hesitation, no guilt that surfaced, no tell. Either she was very practiced at this, or she had stopped thinking of it as something that required hiding. I wasn't sure which one was worse. I gave myself 3 days. 3 days to look carefully, quietly, and without tipping anything over. I wasn't searching for a reason to blow up my marriage. I was searching for context. There's a difference. One is emotional, the other is methodical. I needed to be methodical. I started with what I had access to legally and openly. I pulled 12 months of joint account statements and went through every line. I cross-referenced the transfer dates against our shared calendar.
We used the same digital calendar for scheduling, appointments, trips, social events. It had been her idea to set it up that way years ago. Convenient, she had said. Easy to stay coordinated. It was easy to stay coordinated. She was right about that. 7 of the transfer dates lined up with days she had marked herself as working late or attending out-of-town work events. I checked her company's public event calendar online. 2 of those dates had no corresponding company event listed anywhere. Then I looked at the credit card statements. We had 1 joint card and 1 each in our own names for personal expenses. I had never monitored her personal card. That wasn't the arrangement. But her personal card was linked to our shared financial software for budgeting purposes, which meant the transaction categories were visible to me, even if the specific merchant names were partially masked. 3 entries in the lodging category. Local city. Not travel dates. Not work trips. A name appeared twice in her phone when she left it on the counter one evening, and a message preview came through. I didn't go through her phone. I saw what the screen showed me without unlocking anything. A first name. One I didn't recognize. Casual tone in the preview. The kind of short message you send someone you're completely comfortable with. I wrote the name down. By the end of day 3, I had a clear picture. Not every detail, but enough. Enough to know this wasn't a financial misunderstanding. Enough to know the money and the absences and the name were connected. Enough to know that what I had built my understanding of my marriage on had been quietly and deliberately hollowed out. I called a family lawyer that afternoon. Consultation only. Just to understand my position. Then I went home and made dinner. I chose a Saturday morning. No work to rush to. No external pressure. Nowhere either of us needed to be. I wanted her full attention, and I wanted mine.
I had the printed bank summary, the calendar comparisons I had written out by hand, and the credit card entries I had photographed on my phone. I didn't need props to feel confident, but I wanted her to understand immediately that this was not a suspicion. This was a documented conversation. She was on her second cup of coffee when I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. I told her I needed to talk to her about something serious. I kept my voice level. She put her cup down and gave me her attention. Her expression shifted into that careful look people wear when they sense weight coming but don't know its shape yet. I slid the bank summary across the table. I watched her eyes move across it. I watched the moment she recognized what it was. Her expression didn't collapse, it tightened, a small, controlled adjustment that told me she had thought about this moment before. She had rehearsed something. Maybe not for today specifically, but she had prepared. She said it was her money too. I told her I agreed, and that if she had wanted a personal savings account, I would have supported that completely. What I was asking about was why it had been hidden. She said it wasn't hidden. She just hadn't gotten around to mentioning it. 28 months, $19,000. Hadn't gotten around to it. I put my phone on the table with the credit card entries visible. I told her about the lodging charges in the city on dates that weren't work trips. I told her I had seen the name on her phone. I didn't perform anger. I just laid each thing down in front of her like evidence on a table, which is exactly what it was. That's when the approach changed. She told me I had been neglecting her emotionally for years, that she had felt invisible inside our marriage, that the account was about having something of her own because she never felt secure. The name on her phone was a friend. The hotel charges were personal time she needed and didn't feel she could ask for.
Each explanation arrived perfectly shaped to reframe her choices as my failures. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I asked one question. I asked why, if she had felt that way for years, she had never once said so directly to me. She didn't answer that. The silence after that question was the most honest moment we had shared in a long time. The full picture didn't come out in one conversation. It came out in pieces over the following 2 weeks. Some pieces she gave me, some I found. Some arrived through the lawyer I had already quietly retained, who advised me clearly on what I was entitled to request and what the joint account transfers meant in the context of a divorce filing. The name I had seen on her phone was not a friend. He was someone she had met through a work conference 14 months earlier. The relationship had started as what she described as emotional. She used that word carefully, like it was a boundary that made everything behind it more acceptable. But the hotel charges told a different story. 3 times over 7 months. Local, planned, paid for partially through the second account. The second account wasn't just about independence or feeling secure. It was infrastructure. It had been opened 2 months before the relationship started, which meant either she had been planning something before she met him, or the timing was a coincidence that I was no longer in a position to give her the benefit of. Either way, the money had quietly moved out of our shared life and into something she was building without me. When I presented all of it, she stopped explaining. There were no more reframes, no more reconstructed timelines. She went quiet in a way that confirmed everything the documents had already told me. The absence of a counterargument was its own admission. I told her I had spoken to a lawyer. She asked if I was sure that's what I wanted. I told her what I wanted had stopped being the relevant question the moment she made these decisions without me. We separated formally within the week. She moved to her sister's house. The joint account was frozen pending legal review. The second account became part of the asset disclosure process, which her lawyer apparently advised her to cooperate with fully rather than contest. The divorce took 7 months. It was not dramatic in the way people imagine divorce to be. There was no courtroom screaming, no public collapse. It was paperwork and waiting, and a series of meetings in neutral offices, where 2 people who had once shared a bed negotiated the division of a life they no longer shared. It was exhausting, in the quietest possible way. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday. I remember because I had a call scheduled that afternoon, and I took it. I sat at my desk, discussed a project timeline with a colleague, and went through the rest of the day like it was any other. Not because I wasn't affected, but because the hardest part hadn't been the legal ending. The hardest part had been the months before, when I was still living inside something I now understood had been compromised for a long time. The financial recovery was manageable. The asset split was handled fairly given the documentation we had. I didn't walk away whole, but I walked away clearly. That mattered. The other recovery took longer. Not grief over her specifically. What took time was rebuilding trust in my own perception. I had considered myself observant,
financially aware, grounded, and I had missed 28 months of quiet signals because I had confused familiarity with transparency. I thought knowing someone well meant I would notice if something shifted. I was wrong about that. Familiarity can blind you just as effectively as ignorance can. That was the real lesson. Not that people are dishonest, not that marriage is a risk. Those are things most adults already know in theory.
The real lesson was that trust without periodic verification is just assumption wearing a comfortable face. I'm not cynical about relationships now. I want to be clear about that. What I am is more honest, with myself first, about what I actually know versus what I've decided to believe, because believing it is easier. I also stopped measuring myself against the version of my life I thought I had. That version was gone. Grieving it too long would have meant staying in a story that was already over. What replaced it was quieter, smaller at first, but it was mine, fully mine. No hidden rooms, no second accounts, no locked doors I hadn't been told about. That's not nothing. That's actually everything.